All right, welcome back, free radicals. How does a talking point become more than just a talking point? Well, it starts in the bowels of the worst places in our media, and then it spirals out to people who repeat it, and they don't even know what they're saying. Going back to January of this year, and an amazing, just blatant display of journalistic malfeasance here, to the point where I get angry reading this. I get frustrated and angry that we have a news media that is so controlled by people that don't represent us. Imagine if we had a news media that was at least, maybe they're still controlled. There's no freedom of the press, but let's just say for a moment that they were controlled by people who had our best interests in mind. And they controlled the narrative where you'd hear news stories about how we should clean up the water in Flint, Michigan. Every day we were hearing about Flint and the crisis there. Or we were hearing about how, in some states they're instituting blackouts and brownouts because the infrastructure, the electric grid is in such lousy condition. And the politicians all say, well, this is just going to become a way of life. And you live in the valley where it's like 95 degrees every day. And they're going to turn your AC off for hours while you roast. Okay. All right, that sounds like our standard of living is going up, huh? For the lower and middle classes of this country, there's no end in sight to what is coming unless we shift gears. And the media is not going to help us shift those gears. And that means you elect a true populist who looks at the people of this country not with disdain, but with love, and says, all our citizens should be doing well, not just the select few. This isn't class warfare, by the way, because you can have $10 million and be in the upper class here in the United States. But when somebody is a multi-billionaire, and Bernie Sanders and Tulsi Gabbard hasn't said there shouldn't be billionaires, but Bernie Sanders has said this. And morally, I don't see where he's really wrong. I understand this, you earned it, you get to keep it, and so forth. But at what point do you become a responsible, normal human being where you do look upon the least among us and say, oh, this is nuts? At least say, I've got to do something. And whatever that might be, but it's at least an acknowledgement of how there's a system in place that seems to over-reward people and under-reward people who don't deserve to be so maligned. Yeah, I know there are motivated people. There are so many factors in your success in life. A lot of it does have to do with you. There's no question about it. But there are other external factors that are hard to predict. And certainly, as a society, we should be achieving to do better to either help lift those people up, teach them how to do better, but also just for those downtrodden and really unfortunate situations, we can do better. We should be doing better. So I go back to this article where, and I know, what does this have to do with the New York Times calling Tulsi Gabbard an Assad toady? And by the way, can't define or spell the term. Doesn't even know what it means. Let's go back to this. An interview with Joe Rogan earlier this week, the New York Times columnist Barry B.R.I. Weiss called Hawaii representative and prospective Democratic Party presidential candidate Tulsi Gabbard an Assad toady. But when challenged on it, Weiss couldn't define the term or even spell it, much less substantiate the accusation itself. You see, Weiss is an elitist. She's an opinion columnist, and And she went on with Joe Rogan. And she thought she was probably going to have, a game of softball with Joe. But things got embarrassing when she went in on Gabbard, a progressive Democrat whose foreign policy positions have turned a few heads and made the elite ruling class very nervous. And there she is. There's Bari Weiss. So Bari Weiss doesn't want progressivism in the United States of America. She doesn't want... and by the way, when I say progressivism, I mean it literally. I mean she doesn't want us to progress. She wants us to continue to arm terrorists in foreign countries, to fight battles mainly for oil and territory, natural resources. Gotta prop up the petrodollar. That's another thing. I forgot about that. But here, Ben Norton says, neocon New York Times columnist Bari Weiss smeared Tulsi Gabbard, who bravely opposed regime change and U.S. support for Salafi jihadist Contras. And she called her an Assad toady, then couldn't spell or define toady or offer any evidence to prove her smear. And he says, embarrassingly funny. I think it's embarrassingly tragic. And then she has monstrous ideas. She's an Assad toady, Weiss tells Rogan. When Rogan asks for clarification, which, again, I'm sure she didn't expect, I think that I used that word correctly. She then asks someone off camera to look up what toady means. And keep in mind, this Assad toady thing has gone over to MSNBC. I think it's gone over to CNN. It's been repeated a lot since this Rogan interview. This one is what set the whole thing in motion. Like towing the line, Rogan says? Is that what it means? No, I think it's like, and Weiss drones off without an answer. She then attempts to spell it and can't even do that. Toadie, I think it means what I think it means. So Rogan actually had to read the definition. Toadies, the definition of toady is a person who flatters or defers to others for self-serving reasons. A sycophant. So I did use it right, Weiss exclaims. Of all the presidential candidates running, if you put Tulsi Gabbard's name out there and you put the word sycophant next to it, those two things don't go together. I could see you doing that with Beto O'Rourke, with Kamala Harris, with Joe Biden. Who else? Pick another candidate. Julian Castro, Cory Booker, Amy Klobuchar. I mean, sycophant. So he goes on to say, so she's an Assad sycophant? Is that what you're saying? And then she writes this, or she says this. Yeah, that's proven. Known about her. Wow. See, I never read through this article, and you got to give Sputnik credit because no other media company is going to print this stuff. You notice too how, there are ads on this page, but they're not popping up and messing up the page. My page isn't shutting down. A lot of times I'll do these sort of where I report on the story and I'm in a little box and then I'm reading and these other things are popping up. So it's good. I'm glad that Russia is reducing the amount of ad content that I have to deal with here. Oh, Dave, you're just funding the Russian. By reading a story on this page, I'm funding the Russian government. No, there's still pop-up ads, but they're smartly off to the side and so forth. And anyway, when Rogan asks what Gabbard has said that qualifies her as a sycophant, Weiss replies, I don't remember the details. Okay. So it's proven, known about her, and so why is she a sycophant? Weiss doesn't remember the details. She doesn't remember the most important part of her argument here. So we are at like DEFCON 5 right now when it comes to where we're at when it comes to media information. I don't want to say war because that sounds like another website that's been banned everywhere. So I don't want to say that. We probably should say that before we say that about her. We should probably read it rather right now, just so we know what she said, Rogan notes. And then she goes on to say, I think she's like the mother lode. I love the like. I mean, what is she, a high school junior? I think she's like, like the mother lode of like bad ideas. I'm pretty positive about that. Oh, so she's just generally pretty positive about something. She can't cite the mother lode of ideas. Mother lode? Like how many bad ideas does Tulsi Gabbard have? Look, you could disagree with her foreign policy stuff, but what other mother lode is out there? She says, but maybe I'm wrong. I don't think I'm wrong. See, at this point, she's on the defense, because Rogan calls her out. Right now, as you read through this, though, you think to yourself, this is a manufactured narrative against Tulsi Gabbard. That's what this is. It was manufactured. It was hatched in newsrooms, in major liberal-leaning newspapers, which are, 90% of the newspapers in this country. Funny thing, you won't see this in conservative newspapers, and that's why everybody gets on the fact that if you're a conservative newspaper, you probably don't dislike Tulsi Gabbard and you're not writing negative stories about Tulsi Gabbard every day like everybody else in the liberal newsroom is. You notice that? So then they look at everybody with disdain who likes Tulsi Gabbard, who's not a lockstep liberal without a brain. People who think for themselves tend to like Tulsi Gabbard. The people who are the lemmings, they tend to like people like Elizabeth Warren and Mayor Pete because they're told by the media day after day that these are the right candidates for you. Even though, especially in the case of Mayor Pete, he doesn't have any policy proposals. He has nothing of significance that will change what Donald Trump has done. They write here, it seems to us here at Sputnik that such claims should be made with a bit more confidence than this. So let's set the record straight, shall we? All right, this is good. I like this. This is actual journalism. This is actual reporting from Sputnik. So again, if you don't like this because it's a Russian, quote-unquote, Russian news agency that has infiltrated the country, it hasn't. It's actually doing real reporting. If you want to call that infiltration, fine, but show me where they're not reporting accurately and do it with facts and not with, I don't think I'm wrong. I'm pretty positive I don't think I'm wrong. So anyway, Gabbard, who announced her presidential campaign on January 11th, has drawn incredible amounts of ire from mainstream Democrats, tripping over themselves for war with Syria because in January of 2017, Gabbard met with Syrian President Bashar al-Assad and denounced the opposition rebels in the country's civil war as terrorists. Okay, by the way, in some progressive circles, which is really kind of frustrating and alarming, there are no terrorists. There are none. See, I'm not of the ilk that believes that there are no bad people in the world and that the United States, shouldn't have some sort of military role when it's needed, but it hasn't been needed for quite a long time. And this idea that there are no terrorists it's incorrect. Okay, and there are people, it's like the people who say we shouldn't have a border. Okay, all right. Every other country on the face of the earth has a border. Okay, so your argument right there just goes against, and all the so-called good countries that people love to talk about, like Sweden and Denmark and Canada and so forth, they all have borders, and they're actually fairly strict borders. I mean, their immigration policy, I'm sure, has been streamlined, but they have a border. So, in any event, I wanted to talk about that briefly. She has also expressed skepticism about accusations that Assad's government has used chemical weapons. See, this was another one where, well, everybody knows he used chemical weapons. And Tulsi, the big thing for these commentators was to get Tulsi Gabbard to admit it. Just say it, you know? And it was one of those Sam Kinison things where I'm like, she doesn't have to say anything. She doesn't think that he used chemical weapons based on the intelligence that especially we now know about. Just shut up and leave her alone. It's not her opinion. She doesn't have to worry. Is Assad an enemy of the United States? Yeah, pretty much every dictator doesn't really like the United States. But the better question is he a direct threat to the United States? And I say no. And a lot of my fellow Americans agree with me. And I believe Tulsi Gabbard agrees with that too. So they go on to talk about a little conversation with Jake Tapper. She writes, or she says here, I have seen this cost of war firsthand, which is why I fight so hard for peace. And that's the reality of the situation that we're facing. It's why I have urged and continue to urge U.S. President Donald Trump to meet with people like Kim Jong-un in North Korea. Again, there are many on both the left and the right that say you can't meet with Kim Jong-un on any. You need all kinds of preconditions, and you can't just meet with him. The only alternative to having these kinds of conversations is more war. So, again, more evidence, more proof that the warfare state is the prevailing narrative. It is the prevailing doctrine. And this is why I'm willing to go over to the Green Party, even though I don't like some of the stuff they talk about, where I think some of it is, I won't say extreme, but some of it needs to be a little bit more pragmatic. And I know that's a buzzword in liberal circles for caving in, but I'm not suggesting that. I'm suggesting making the language understandable for people who don't get Eco Green New Deal 101. And I'm not saying it's a bad idea. A jobs program is exactly what the lower and middle classes need in this country right now. But I'm willing to go over to a party like the Green Party and maybe even the Libertarians because their views on war are similar, and it's a universal concept that people in those parties agree with and want to push for. And it's funny that the two major parties have no place for anti-war messages and candidates. Tulsi Gabbard got excoriated by this woman who didn't even really know what the definition of the word toady is. And I think that should tell you a lot about the depth of reporting that we're getting now from hallowed places like the New York Times. It's just BS. It is all BS. And anyone who comes at you and says, well, you're just a conspiracy theorist, no, this is factual here. The woman didn't know. And then what happened after she didn't know and this got out there, rather than being a backlash against her, this became like urban legend. Well, we all know that, Tulsi Gabbard is a toady and she probably gets money and she's getting money funneled to her campaign from Russia and who knows what else. And it's all BS. It's all just to obfuscate the fact that our country continues to be involved in wars that make no sense, that just prop up military contractors and the military in general and the little cottage industries that surround those industries, but really at the expense of a healthy, vibrant economy where human beings don't have to get involved with war in order to be successful. Tulsi Gabbard is an existential threat to the two-party narrative, kind of the same way Ron Paul was, but maybe worse because Tulsi is such an interesting mix of policies and positions, and she's attractive and she's young, and she's a force. She is an energy that is hard to contain, and I think these people are underestimating her willingness to go to the mat for these ideas. I with a smear like this that began the year, and a continuing smear which shows up as recently as last weekend, people for some reason in this country are just hell-bent on us having another mediocre president who just takes the baton from the other guy or woman and says, yeah, just give me this. This is mine. I've got the power now. I'm going to make some changes that aren't going to be systemic. I'm just going to make a little tweaking around the edges so the people who voted for me think I'm doing something worthwhile. And there's a part of me, by the way, when I wake up, sometimes I just say, there's nothing any of us can do. Seriously. I have this thought. It's kind of like somebody doubting their faith and saying, but what if there isn't a God? What do I do now? I just live my life to the best of my ability, try to make my family happy, try to treat people well. But there's a part of me that is starting to think that this giant ocean liner, Obama used this analogy, by the way, but I believe there's some truth to it, not in the way he said it. But this thing is already on autopilot, and we don't control it. We can get a new captain in there, and he's going to take orders from down below. That's what's going to happen. And it might even happen if Tulsi Gabbard were the president. Like, hey, do you want to still be president? Do you think Tulsi Gabbard is going to run to a podium somewhere and start telling us about all of these deep state people who are corrupt and who are calling the shots and have been for literally decades when it comes to our foreign policy and our media establishment? This is all tied together, and it's easy to connect the dots. Jimmy Dore does it on his show every time he hits the airwaves. It's breathtaking how much truth and information come out, and he's a comedian, and he's got a bunch of other comedians who are a bunch of smart alecks who are funny, really funny people, and who are woke to the real truth. It's not just being woke. It's not politically correct woke. It's actually being awake to what's been going on in our government now for decades. So, if you're looking for the root of this evil, here it is. And thanks to Sputnik for keeping this up. I'm surprised that, because it's their own website, I'm surprised Google would even take me here, but I found it somehow, and I'm surprised that they're not trying to block people from seeing this article. You can check it out as well. Just type in those words, and you can post this and tell people, hey, this is the origin of how we got Assad Todi. And it's a tragedy that our government seems to not care about the least of these and wants to prop up a military or a militaristic narrative to obfuscate any real progress that we could make as human beings. All right, I've talked enough. I am done. I'll be back soon. Thanks again for supporting the channel. And aloha from sunny Florida.